Afternoon, it's Friday the 24th of April 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Okay, let's get straight on. And, well, the usual statistics as we go through this COVID-19 crisis. 2.745 million cases is the latest total. The latest number of deaths up to 191,791. Global recoveries up to 755,526. And that leaves 1.798 million active cases, of which 1.739 are mild, and 58,693 are considered serious or critical. Patrick, now, good news. Bill Gates has published a new post on his website, and here it is, the first modern pandemic. And he says it's reasonable for people to ask whether the behaviour change was necessary, because that's really what this is about, Patrick. It's behaviour change. He says overwhelmingly the answer is yes. There might be a few areas where the number of cases would have gotten large numbers of infections and deaths, but there was no way to know in advance which areas those would be. The change allowed us to avoid many millions of deaths and extreme overload in hospitals. So he's keeping pushing the Imperial College narrative here. It's hard to say which way round that narrative came from, but anyway, the economic cost that has been paid to reduce the infection rate is unprecedented. The drop in employment is faster than anything we've ever experienced. Entire sectors of the economy are shut down. It's important to realise that these are not just the result of government policies restricting activities. When people hear that an infectious disease is spreading widely, they change their behaviour. There was never a choice to have a strong economy of 2019 in 2020. So that's the narrative that he's pushing.
Did he really say that? There's not a choice?
There was never a choice to have the strong economy of 2019 in 2020 is the narrative that he's pushing. Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, we'll go on this later, Mike, but basically he's saying there was no alternative.
He's saying there was no alternative.
He's saying no alternative.
When people hear the infectious disease is spreading widely, well, how did people hear that? Well, of course, that's been pushed by the mainstream press. It's been pushed by government. And so it wasn't that people just heard about it.
And as we'll show later, a lot of this was a direct reaction to what China was doing. How China reacted to this crisis was copied really by the Western countries. And by the way, there was an alternative, which we'll show later. A lot of countries and states within the U.S. opted not to lock down. We'll look at some of the results and compare them with lockdown states in just a minute, Mike.
Well, let's look at this then. Let's look at some of the results of lockdown. This is from the World Food Programme. They are now saying that the COVID-19 pandemic will see more than 250 million people suffering acute hunger by the end of the year. So they're putting a number of 265 million people on low and middle incomes in Africa, in the Middle East, in other places where they've seen, because they're ultimately supplying this low price economy that we've been running, and clothing and other things. They are supplying most of that, Patrick, and of course all our shops are shut in the West, so we are not buying their products. And so the World Food Programme from the United Nations now recognising that and really making the point that once again the cure is worse than the disease. So let's move on then to Euromomo. Now Euromomo, of course, is the European Mortality Monitoring Service. It was funded by the European Commission initially. They've got a bright and shiny new website, Patrick, because they've had so much more interest in them in the last few weeks. So let's just have a look at their latest statistics, which were released yesterday. And we'll start here. This is pooled deaths. Now you can see the blue line is pooled deaths. So this is not just COVID-19, this is all deaths. It's not all European countries, but it's most European countries, including the UK, is included in this figure. And you can see that the dotted line, or the grey band that runs across there is the normal range. The dotted line is the baseline, and the red dotted line is what they consider to be a substantial increase. But as we can see here, if we look across all ages, the current situation is not really any worse than we have seen in previous years. We've said this before. 2017, it's not so dissimilar. So again, we ask why the lockdown, why the shutdown of the economy. Now, the one thing that is different about this, of course, is that 2017 peak arrived at around just after Christmas, so January time. The peak is much later this year, but nonetheless, in terms of the absolute numbers, not any higher than was seen, or not much higher anyway than was seen in 2017. So nothing particularly unusual. So let's break this down by ages, and we can see that for babies and young children, it's well below what they consider the baseline. If we head on to 5 to 14-year-olds, again, well below what they consider the baseline. If we go to the 15 to 64-year-olds, we're seeing a bit of a peak, but again, not massively above what we've seen before.
Statistically, Mike, that's insignificant, really, from a statistical point of view, isn't it?
Well, we're looking at absolute numbers here. We're not looking at some kind of standard deviation. These are absolute numbers. So then we look at 65 plus, and again, we find that the peak is not massively higher than what we've seen before in the last few years. So again, we have to ask, why the lockdown, why the shutdown? But it gets more interesting because they've published, for the first time that I've seen, they have published data on excess deaths. And so here we have a baseline, which is 0. And this is cumulative deaths. So this is deaths adding week by week by week as we go through the year. Now, the yellow line is for 2018, the grey line is for 2019, and the blue line is for 2020 so far. And what we can see there very clearly is that excess mortality across all ages is still below what was seen in 2018. And it goes, we can show that for the various age groups, again, well below 2018 and 2019 for the 0 to 4 years age groups. For 5 to 14, still well below. 15 to 64, we see it just slightly creeping above the 2018 excess mortality figures. And for 65 plus, it's still below the excess mortality figures for 2018. Again, we've got to ask the question, why the lockdown? So there is no justification for it.
Fairly unremarkable, Mike, in terms of statistics and how this is represented in terms of a pandemic. Not that shocking, fairly unremarkable. It's amazing, Mike. There's a lot of data coming in right now. A lot of data coming regarding testing, serological testing, and the results are showing, Mike, that, well, they're showing what we initially said when this all broke out. We said, what is the case fatality rate for COVID-19? Here's one study. This is one of many studies, which is just coming in now. This is in California. New study shows higher COVID-19 cases. In other words, more people are infected with a much lower fatality rate, Mike. And so this is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford University. He's also working with Dr. John Ioannidis. And what Jay Bhattacharya is saying, Mike, here is that it's probably as deadly as the flu or a little bit worse based on their testing. Dr. John Ioannidis, in the same ballpark as seasonal influenza, said Dr. Ioannidis, Mike. And we're looking at here the World Health Organization, Mike, from their own numbers. Fatality rate for COVID-19 looks like 0.11 to 0.07. If you scale up regarding the number of worldwide cases, the worldwide infections on record, and fatalities. So this is perfectly within the same range, Mike, as the seasonal flu. And of course, this has been echoed by a number of other scientists. I could go on and on. We have a whole list here of various statements by different people and statistics coming back, Mike. So it's just not the deadly pandemic that it was marketed as when it came out. But the reaction was predictable, Mike, because there was no data. So a lot of these decisions, lockdown, et cetera, were made with very little data, if any data. Now, Kern County in California, Mike, we're going to look at a video clip in a second. And this is Dr. Dan Erickson in Kern County, and he's from Accelerated Medical Health, private organization's got clinics up and down the state, Mike. And basically what he's saying is not only is he reflecting the studies that we've just shown in terms of the low case fatality rate, but he's also saying the secondary effects are now becoming visible from COVID-19. We're talking about spousal abuse, alcoholism, and a number of other things that are going to push and drive fatality and casualty rates and just general social damage going forward. Let's listen to this. This is a pretty stunning clip here by this health professional here in California.
The next thing I wanted to talk about is the effects of COVID-19, the secondary effects. COVID-19 is one aspect of our health sector. What has it caused to have us be involved in social isolation? What does it cause that we are seeing the community respond to? Child molestation is increasing at a severe rate. We could go over multiple cases of children who have been molested due to angry family members who are intoxicated, who are home, who have no paycheck. These things last a lifetime. This isn't about a seasonal flu. These are things that will follow these people and affect them in a negative fashion for their life. And these are secondary effects from COVID. And these are from me talking to ERs, talking to my doctors, and talking to people across the country and finding out what they're seeing. Spousal abuse. We see people coming in here with black eyes and cuts on their face. It's an obvious abuse case. These are things that will affect them for a lifetime, not for a season. Alcoholism, anxiety, depression, suicide. I talked to Donnie Youngblood and various people in the community, and I've asked them, how are things going? Suicide is spiking. Education has dropped off. Economic collapse. Medical industry, we're all suffering because our staff isn't here and we have no volume. These are all real things that I'm seeing every day. I don't read about this stuff. I'm seeing it in my clinics. We have clinics from Fresno to San Diego, and these things are spiking in our community. These things will affect people for a lifetime, not for a season. So let's make sure we're clear on that.
Now, Patrick, he's saying these are secondary effects of COVID-19, but of course, these are only secondary effects of COVID-19 because of the choices that our politicians made to lock down. Either this afternoon or possibly tomorrow morning, I'm going to be publishing an article on the UK Column News, which demonstrates that the UK only changed their policy on this in 2017, and that up until that point, it was absolutely the case that the UK's policy was that in the event of a pandemic, that there should be no lockdown, that the business should be business as usual, and that you look after the people that are most at risk.
Which is a sensible policy.
Absolutely, but as we've just seen from the Euromomo stats, and we've been trying to make this point over the last couple of weeks, what we're seeing here is normal mortality, normal age ranges, normal rates of mortality, perhaps skewed slightly in terms of the week that it's happening in, but more or less normal mortality.
Yeah, and we're also seeing abnormal spikes in other areas, as Dr. Erickson was saying. But Mike, there's also cancer patients who have had, hundreds of thousands potentially worldwide cancer patients who have had essential operations or colonoscopies delayed and things like that, early detection procedures that all been pushed to the side for what all the scientists and experts are now saying is no more fatal than the seasonal flu. Mike, so that there is no debate. The debate is over now as the data comes in. So everything that was decided and done in haste and in a mass panic in February and March, now is all the results are coming home to roost, Mike, and it is not pretty. But let's look at here, this is from the Financial Times, lockdown versus non-lockdown. And as you can see, Mike, here, these are some of the countries as they're breaking out along a timeline here. And you know, if there was a big difference in terms of lockdown policy, Mike, you'd see some normalization between some of these countries. Sweden would probably appear sort of in the middle there, but you've got Japan, South Korea, Sweden, non-lockdown countries, Mike. And look at the difference between the lockdown countries. So there's a marked difference there, Mike, in terms of fatalities and deaths. So again, the data shows that the lockdown states, the lockdown policies, the argument that they were reducing fatalities, this really flies in the face of the actual science, the actual data, Mike, because what we're seeing is that in what you've showed in previous programs at the UK Column is that the crisis in terms of infection rate, growth acceleration has already peaked officially around April 8th or 10th, but in terms of growth rate, even before the lockdown was imposed in the UK. So that's irrefutable in terms of the data that's available, Mike. So, but let's take another look at this in terms of the international scene here. And the red line is deaths per million. Along the bottom, we have the non-lockdown countries on the left. Again, the lockdown countries on the right. That's cases per million, the green bar there. As you can see, look at the red line. That's the line to look at. That is deaths per million. This is a sensible metric, Mike, because we're told that the lockdown was for saving lives. All of these policies, social distancing, everything is because we need to save lives, save the NHS, stay at home. But look at the lockdown countries on the right-hand side. Mexico, of course, is in the middle. They came in late on April 2nd with a lockdown policy, but essentially they were non-lockdown all before that. And so look at the results in terms of Sweden here, 132 deaths per million. Their numbers have gone up slightly, but again, statistically for a country of 10.5 million, they're looking at around just over 2,000 deaths since the beginning of this crisis.
But it doesn't really matter anyway, Patrick, does it? Because the key point here is that if you look at Sweden, even though they've come up a little bit, they are in no worse position than the lockdown countries, and therefore, where's the justification for the lockdown?
Well, they've already won. All of the non-lockdown countries have won, Mike, because they've achieved the same or better results without having to blow up their economy and crush their society, break up communities, put hundreds of millions of people really on the poverty line, potentially globally, but on the unemployment rolls officially in the US, tens of millions already, and many millions in the UK. So look at the results. I mean, there's no real comparison in terms of the performance there. The non-lockdown countries are outperforming on average, in general, the lockdown countries. I mean, look at some of the numbers here are just unbelievable. Now let's look at the United States, non-lockdown versus lockdown. You see the 8 states in the middle. We covered this last week, Mike. This is North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Wyoming, Utah, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. They're calling these now the free 8, Mike. And these people are quite proud of their state governors for holding their nerve against a campaign of national pressure to shut down their economies and to shut down their societies. They didn't do it. And let's look at the results of some of these non-lockdown states in the US versus lockdown states. And again, this is the number to look at in terms of the US states here, Mike. The red line is deaths per million. Cases per million is the yellow bars. And Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Arkansas, the main 5 there. And those are the numbers in terms of deaths per million, 25, 31, 20, 12, 15. And let's look at the lockdown states here, some comparable Midwestern lockdown states to compare. The results are just really horrific in terms of the lockdown states. Now, is there reasons for that in terms of population density? Yes, there's a number of different ways you can look at this, Mike, but overwhelmingly, like we can see on the country by country comparison, Mike, the states didn't have to destroy their economies, and there's a trust between citizens and government, which is still in place. That's really important in terms of the social contract, and this is what Sweden really relied on, is they trusted their citizens to implement common sense measures instead of, basically treating them like they were in, quote, lockdown, which is a prison term from US prisons in terms of locking cells down. I mean, psychologically, just the use of that term alone from Western governments should tell you a lot, Mike, about the sort of social engineering aspect of how this was rolled out with the government and the media.
Right, well, we began this segment with Bill Gates, so let's end with Bill Gates, and I just want to highlight the results of the UK column poll on Twitter. Should UK public trust Bill Gates in health and vaccine matters and policy? Well, when I took this screenshot, there were 7,025 votes and a few hours left. That's probably just about expired now. Well, at that point, it was 92.2% said they did not trust Bill Gates, and 7.8% said that they do trust Bill Gates. So I think that's a pretty clear indictment of Bill Gates and his policies, and of course, absolutely echoes the comments on Bill Gates' Instagram feeds.
Pretty good sample size there, Mike. 7,025 votes. Not bad. Bigger than
most of the pollsters, isn't it?
Some of the Rasmussen and Zogby polls are down sort of 1,500. So I gather there's a little bit of a confirmation bias with your followers on Twitter and their friends, but it's still 7,000 people.
Yes.
So that's a pretty good sample.
Right, now let's talk about Wednesday's live stream from the government on this. And here's Dominic Raab, of course, First Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary, and he was, what was he talking about? In the sight of our armed forces working side by side with NHS staffs offers reassurance We will come through the crisis. So if you were in any doubt that we were going to do that, then that has been allayed, no doubt. He went on to say it's only fitting to pay tribute to the amazing work of our armed forces and the Ministry of Defence. They've been there every step of the way, helping reinforce our critical care capacity, supporting local resilience and delivering personal protective equipment where it's needed most, and the mobile labs critical for ramping up testing capacity right across the country. So that's fantastic stuff. Well, the head of the British Army, of course, Nick Carter, General Sir Nick Carter, and he was also at this particular briefing. So let's just listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
And we've been involved with the Cabinet Office Rapid Response Unit, with our 77 Brigade helping to quash rumours from misinformation, but also to counter disinformation. Between 3,000 and 4,000 of our people have been involved, with around 20,000 available the whole time at high readiness.
So Patrick, 20,000 people sitting at high readiness, thousands of people involved in this. Now let's just
before we go, Mike. He's wearing desert camo at that press briefing, Mike. Desert camo in the UK.
Yes.
Where are there deserts in the UK? Where are the sand dunes?
I don't know.
Is there a war going on?
I don't know,
Yeah.
but look, in order to put this in context, to understand what this means, we need to go back to Arusi. Oh, sorry. I do apologise. That was a slight mistake. We need to go back to Arusi presentation that he gave a year or so, 18 months ago. And he was basically saying this. Russia, China, Yemen, Libya, the Sahel. He's very concerned about all these regions geopolitically. He said our own media has a really important role to play in setting up well-informed public debate. And he said that political warfare is war by other means. He went on to say this requires a fusion approach. This is very important. This is all about cross-government working together. So one of the features or one of the things that he was pushing hardest during the live stream on Wednesday was that he's working with civilian agencies, and we'll come on to that in a second, but also right across government, all government departments. This is fusion, getting everybody working together. He said that NATO is turning its mind effectively to the challenges of the future, including China, and we're going to come on to the China issue in a minute. But he also had this to say. We also, though, need to continue to improve our ability to fight on this new battlefield. And I think it's important that we build on the excellent foundation we've created for information warfare through our 77 Brigade, which is now giving us the capability to compete in the war of narratives at the tactical level. This is what it's about. So when he says that he's got a couple of thousand people working full time on this, thousands of others working, on short notice to get involved. He's talking about information warfare, but he's admitting that he is waging this information warfare on the British people.
Not only that, Mike, but what is Brigade 77 when you have thousands of people working on controlling the narrative? What are they? They're sock puppet accounts on social media. They're fake Twitter accounts, fake Facebook accounts. These aren't people who are working under their own ID or their own, and this is the behavior that the Silicon Valley companies, Mike, are sort of, telling people is not proper online behavior. The government is doing it with boiler rooms or people working at home now in the gig economy, I guess, for Brigade 77. Sock puppet accounts, trolling people in comment threads, Mike, with fake avatars. On your domestic population?
Absolutely, but it gets better because during that presentation he also said that they're working very closely with the Rapid Response Unit within the Cabinet Office. Now, Rapid Response Unit was set up in 2018. It was given a year to prove its worth, and then in August last year it was given permanent footing. The Cabinet Office Minister at the time was Oliver Dowden. He is now the Culture Secretary, and this is what he had to say: transforming the government. That's the wrong quote. Okay, we'll move on. But anyway, the point here is that Oliver Dowden has now rebuilt, or he rebutted 70 false claims per week since the coronavirus crisis hit the UK, he said. That's what he claims. They are working very, very hard to rebut these false narratives. Now, what was really interesting, Patrick, was that quite a number of the ones that they mentioned in their press release were mainstream media comments, so stuff that was out in the mainstream media where the government were taking offence at some of the things that were being said and felt they had to rebut it. But nonetheless, the Rapid Response Unit, also like 77 Brigade, trolling social media. They're playing the same game, and this is another example of the fusion doctrine at work, where we've got military and civilian personnel working together to counter so-called disinformation.
Is it no coincidence, Mike, that the rapid response mechanism among NATO member states, you see the policies among NATO member states are more or less streamlined with regards to the response to this so-called pandemic?
Right. It's very interesting that you say that, because you've made a mistake there. You've said rapid response mechanism. This is the rapid response unit. These are two different things, but they're named basically the same because they do basically the same job.
Right.
Now, what you're talking about is the rapid response mechanism, which is where all the G20 countries have a common narrative, which is then pursued through the mainstream media. The rapid response unit is there to make
the G7.
The rapid response unit is there to make sure that narrative is succeeding.
Isn't that what we're looking at right now?
Absolutely. So this is fusion again, but it doesn't end there, because the House of Commons Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee is supposed to hold the Department for Culture, Media and Sport to account. But here's Julian Knight from the House of Commons Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee saying the deliberate spreading of false information about COVID-19 could have serious consequences. Much of this is happening on social media through private channels, putting the onus on friends and family to identify whether the information they're seeing is misleading. And so they are now calling for the public to send them examples of false info that they're finding about COVID-19, particularly on private channels. So they're not interested so much in the stuff that's in the public domain. They want to know what people are talking about amongst themselves privately. This is a level of Stasi type activity which is unprecedented in this country. We will ask government and social media companies how they're tackling it when the House of Commons returns. So they initially pushed this out about a week ago, and this is their position. And Patrick, I'm staggered by this.
So the government's soliciting private chat conversations from the public on what people think might be misinformation.
Absolutely. This is, again, working with 77 Brigade and the Rapid Response Unit to push this forward. Doesn't end there. Here is Solomon Elliott. He's an advisor to the BBC's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Group. He's extremely concerned. Sorry, we put that on screen. He's extremely concerned that young people aren't getting the full picture and that they need help to understand the situation. And he says that senseless witch hunts against 5G masts are a consequence of news illiteracy and influential figures peddling misinformation. Not prepared to accept that perhaps people's reactions might be something to do with the fact that the Fourth Estate isn't actually holding anybody to account or asking the right kinds of questions. No acknowledgement of that. But he now wants the idea of news literacy made part of the national curriculum. He says it's not sufficient to do the Cairncross idea of having Ofcom trying to promote news literacy. It's got to be actually part of the national national curriculum and taught in schools as part of the day-to-day training programs in schools.
Well, the problem with this approach, Mike, is that it basically eschews critical thinking. And as any good scientist or any good academic will tell you, it is their own research, it is their own study, it is their own dogged determination to get the evidence and come closer to the truth that usually produces the best results and innovation and great papers and great work in academic and science. It's not from everybody following what the government is putting out in press briefings and the mainstream media, basically acting as stenographers and repeating that and then pushing that through the BBC and now through the school curriculums. That is not how you foster innovation. Is not how you build an intellectual base in your culture, in your country, Mike. So any great academic or scientist will tell you that.
Okay, now if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are options to do that there, and we would be very grateful for any support you can give us. Now, we were talking about China on Wednesday's programme and the building of a narrative, an anti-Chinese narrative We're asking where that's going. Will it end with a Cold War, which is what some people are suggesting, or will it go further than that? If we consider what Nick Carter was saying, of course, he's very concerned about the Sahel, and if we take into account Russi's view that proxy wars are the way forward, then perhaps the Sahel is the region where that might happen, because we've got four of the big powers, as they like to describe themselves, sort of coming together in that area, trying to gain influence. But anyway, this is The Economist here asking, is China winning, and pushing forward with the narrative that the virus is the Wuhan virus, and really, you know, China's playing a geopolitical game, exploiting the virus, and so on. This is echoed in the last day or two in the Daily Mail. China's post-pandemic power grab. Beijing is desperate to overtake America as the world's economic superpower, and with the West brought to its knees by the virus, who can stop it? And this is one of three articles that the Mail has tried to push out over the last few weeks. Then the Atlantic Council. Well, of course, they can't avoid this sort of thing. China's failing coronavirus strategy. So China has a strategy here that they're pushing forward with. And they're saying that as facts emerge about China's efforts to contain the virus and take advantage of the international disorder the pandemic has caused, Beijing's narrative of triumph is increasingly turning to a narrative of blunder and blunt self-interest. And so it goes on. And it culminated yesterday, which I just happened to catch live, an interview which the Express covered. I think the Express was the only mainstream newspaper that covered this today. Chinese ambassador rages at West for adopting gunboat diplomacy to bully China. Now, this was an interview with the BBC, and it was held over Zoom, Patrick. And as you know, on Zoom, when somebody speaks, the camera tends to move to them, so you see the person who's speaking on screen automatically. This is difficult for the BBC because as the Chinese ambassador was speaking, he started to speak about the issue of the fact that there's political point scoring going on over the virus, and attempts to blame China for this. I hear quite a lot of the speculation of disinformation about China covering up or hiding something. It's not true, is what he said. This is not the era of gunboat diplomacy. This is not the era when China was still a semi-feudal society. It's the 21st century. And he was not raging as the Express is suggesting. But what was interesting was at the point where he was criticizing Western countries for using this gunboat diplomacy and using the virus for political point scoring, the BBC journalist apparently made some noise, and the video switched to him automatically, and he had a bit of a disparaging look on his face. It caught him in the act, as it were, and it was pretty clear there wasn't going to be much objective interviewing going on at that. So the narrative building here. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and where we're going.
Well, it's interesting. In a minute, I'll show you my take on this. But you know, there is a narrative building in the West, Mike, led by the United States, definitely led by the right wing of the Republican Party and the extreme right wing, the neocon wing, and Donald Trump himself chiming in on the Chinese virus. China needs to pay reparations. One state actually is filing a lawsuit, Missouri, against China for economic damages to be repaid. And of course, China's response to the U.S. on this is, well, we got the H1N1 flu.
From the U.S.
From the U.S., and many more people died, and we didn't ask for reparations. And they gave a number of examples. So, you know, in terms of China geopolitically, you know, I don't believe the U.S. or the West have a very good case there. There's also this the story that's being pushed on the alternative media that China released the coronavirus from a biolab in Wuhan, okay, a level 4 security biolab. Now, they were working on coronavirus studies there, but as other people's research shows, Mike, so is the U.S., and the U.S. funded the program in Wuhan, by the way, through a research grant from Anthony Fauci's own department, by the way. So that is not clear. But what is clear, Mike, is that the West are, while they're railing against China, Mike, they're also adopting all of China's policies in terms of reacting to the coronavirus COVID-19 crisis. We'll show you some examples of that, but let's look at this concept of the Nightingale Hospital. And so, apologies for the spelling on the headline.
So that's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the Nightingale is a big idea, Mike. So this is from Birmingham, though. This is a headline: No patients treated at Birmingham's new Nightingale Hospital so far after opening 10 days ago. Now, there are other Nightingale hospitals, Mike, opening in Bristol. We heard an announcement of Exeter, but other cities around the country, right? Harrogate.
Absolutely.
So there's all these Nightingale centers opening, Mike, around the country. But let's look at what's happening. This is the one in Birmingham. You can see Prince William addressing the staff and assorted military personnel there. And of course, everybody is observing social distancing there. Isn't that excellent? But is there any patients there? This is the question, Mike. So what is this? This is in Birmingham. This is in the where's this? The NEC or?
I think it's the NEC. But I mean, building these was really a response to China building their hospitals so quickly.
Oh, and we'll show you exactly how that rolled out. But so it's really a photo op. And again, this was what you covered the other day. This is the Excel Center, Nightingale in London, calling it a war zone. Of course, there was no patients there. I think 19 patients they reported.
That's what they reported.
Auspicious number there. And again, this is an aerial shot here, and they're basically saying that they're ready for a war, basically. And of course, what is this? This is an exhibition center. They say they built it in 10 days. This is built in around 10 days. They didn't build this. They set up an exhibition hall in 10 days, because that's really what this is now. It's an exhibition, Mike.
Yes.
They didn't build the Excel Center. China actually built it from scratch. Now, but we have some criticism about China, which we'll show, but saying, we are doing this to save lives of Londoners. These are our comrades. There's no difference. It doesn't matter if they're civilian or military. This is a military person speaking to the Daily Mail. So again, this invoking the military aspect of this, that we're at war. Now let's look at China here. Basically, the Nightingale concept really, Mike, was made in China. So take a look at this. Now this is what we were flooded in our media with. Do you remember?
Yes,
back in February?
absolutely.
So this is this spectacle of what China did in 10 days. They built this grand hospital from scratch. Okay. Now, was it necessary to embark on this giant public works project in China at the time, Mike? And if you even look at the Chinese numbers, actually, it doesn't look like it. This was a gesture. This was a symbolic act by the Chinese Communist Party, by the state, to show its people that it has what it takes to react to any crisis, and it does it in grand fashion. Was this necessary? Was this financially prudent, Mike? Is this going to be used over and over again? Is this a good investment of state funds? Well, is China going to be accountable to its people? This is the question. No, they're not. They don't care. They just do what they do and make their statements, and they're in charge, basically. But the problem is this sort of attitude in terms of governing your population is what is being adopted by Western countries with all of their reactions to the coronavirus from day one. And we'll move on and just look at China. Put this sports stadium picture out, Mike. This got a lot of traction at the time. This was in Wuhan. Again, this exhibition hall type concept. This was made in China. This is the point, made in China. The concept of the big triage arena hospital, the Nightingale concept, was made in China. Okay, those aren't going to be full beds full of COVID-19 patients. This was a photo op made in China. Here we are in Spain. Again, ridiculous. As if they're going to be treating COVID patients in this. This was a photo op in a parking garage in Spain, or some sort of building, a temporary hospital for vulnerable people, they're calling it. Okay, unnecessary, wasn't used. As you can see, there's nobody in it. It's hard to find any pictures of any of these staging triage sites with any actual patients in them. And here's in New York City, they did the same thing. This is a concept made in China. The exhibition hall here, and there's parking garage hospitals.
They even brought the boats in.
They brought the boats in. I'll show you the boats. So this is in California, and they're getting into the act here. This is in a basketball gymnasium or sports hall. I mean, they just put cots out, Mike, with pillows, some towels on the foot there, like they're going to be actually treating people with respiratory illnesses. It's ridiculous. This is a photo op. Here we are in São Paulo, Brazil, in a football stadium. Again, very impressive. Are there many cases of COVID in Brazil? Pretty much none. in terms of the scale of their population, which we showed last week, maybe a couple of thousand or less than a couple of thousand, a country with over 200 million population. So a non-event in Brazil, yet you see the photo ops, the big impressive state symbolic acts of action. So they're showing that we are going to act. This is in Seattle, Washington. This is ridiculous. This is in, I don't know what this is, an air hangar or something. And they've just laid out and using military colored blankets, Mike, on the beds. It gives it that kind of military look. Was this necessary, this quote field hospital?
And in fact, that particular one was shut down just a week or so ago and moved somewhere else because they hadn't treated any patients.
Zero. Okay, this is in Seattle. So that's in March. And here we are in Virginia. This is probably, this takes the biscuit, Mike, in terms of a triage. Look, they've got sort of leather recliner seats there, which they must have got from the local furniture depot. And they've got sort of IV drip bags next to them or something. I mean, this is just ridiculous. This is in Virginia. So everyone's in on the act. They're basically doing the Chinese style, communicating to their public that they will spring into action. As you said, Mike, there's the boat that pulled into New York City harbor there, this giant medical ship, as if it's going to have a queue of COVID-19 patients waiting to get on it. The whole concept of it, Mike, is just ridiculous. But those are the images that were fed into our media nonstop from February till now, and a lot of this thing informed public opinion, and it also scared the public and also motivated, or maybe in a negative way, politicians to give the public what they want, which is a Chinese-style reaction to the crisis. This is my point.
Right, so it's a PR exercise. Now, somebody in the chat box saying Nightingale isn't even running at 1%. What's going on? You've explained it, it's a PR exercise, but in fact the demand was never there because the virus was never that serious.
No, there was no demand for medical treatment, Mike, but there was a desire by government to make a big international statement. This is part of the geopolitics as well. Look what China does, we can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. We can build it in 10 days. Let's show the world what we can do. Now, is that a good way to spend public money, Mike?
No, it's not a good way to spend public money, and in parallel with that, we've got this shutdown of the entire economy as well, which is clearly not of benefit to us.
So let's look at some of the other activities here. This is interesting, Mike. No patient treated at Birmingham. So, but this is, what are they doing, Mike? They're wearing biohazard suits and they're disinfecting public areas. They're spraying them with chemicals. Now, in Birmingham, Mike.
Yes.
So they're spraying public park benches for COVID-19. Where did they get that idea, Mike?
Oh, well, on the basis of what you've just said, perhaps only one place.
China. So let's look at where they got their inspiration, where the local government and local authorities in the UK get their inspiration for, again, made in China. Look at this. These are trucks that are basically driving down the street, blowing chemicals and disinfectant into the air through giant cannons. Here they are spraying buildings, spraying the side. I mean, this is just ridiculous, Mike. But this is going out as like big time propaganda in China, showing that they're tackling COVID-19, and this exact techniques are being mirrored in the West by Western countries. Coronavirus is not living on this side of buildings. Now, I'm going to show you it's even worse, Mike. Not only are they sending this out with spray trucks, but when all fails and the trucks aren't working, Mike, deploy the drones to spray COVID-19 chemicals in the air. Look, they're filling them up now. And what are they going to do with these tanks, Mike? They're going to stick them onto drones. And I kid you not, the Chinese are going to launch that drone, send it down the street, spraying people's houses and streets with disinfectant. This is just pure lunacy. This is totally ridiculous. But this is not far off of what some Western countries are doing, okay? It's just ridiculous. This idea that the coronavirus lives everywhere and everything needs to be disinfected. Now, having lived in the Middle East, Mike, they used to send trucks to spray for mosquitoes in the summer, and literally spraying verandas and people's houses. Now, there's also a high incidence of cancer in some of these countries. What are in these Chinese chemical trucks, Mike, that they're spraying everybody with? Is there going to be a carcinogen induced outbreak of cancer in a couple of years? And it just gets even better. And I have to show you this because this, even by Chinese standards, this really takes the biscuit, Mike. This is a disinfectant tunnel which is being launched in China. And this is literally coming from their state propaganda outlets, organs here. 20 seconds and you get fully disinfected. What are the health effects? What are they actually breathing in there that they have to walk through these disinfectant tunnels? This is madness, total madness. And these are the types of things, this is the mentality that Western governments and authorities and the media are basically adopting through this kind of hypochondriac.
Well, they're looking at what China's doing with jealousy, aren't they? Absolute jealousy.
Right, yeah. So saying, well, they've really made a strong statement, and they know how to keep their people in order, basically. Now, all of China's social contact tracing, the app that China has that traces and tracks everybody, forces you into quarantine if you come within 6 feet of somebody who has tested positive for COVID-19. That is operational right now in China. There's a number of reports. We've got them up at 21st Century Wire, Mike. And that's a horrific, like literally you have to drop whatever you're doing, whether you're with your family, you're traveling, you're at work, go immediately into quarantine, wait for a doctor to contact you to be checked up and tested. And anyone within 6 feet of you on that app basically will have to do the same thing.
So we're seeing this type of thing being developed in the UK, also in the United States. And so you're saying here, Trump's hiring Thales Palantir to track Americans with Chinese-style surveillance app. That Palantir, of course, behind the NHS app as well. He's one of the companies behind that too. So this surveillance state that we have been, in the West, have been criticizing China for so many years is coming here.
Sure. Palantir is basically providing the AI-driven big data backbone for this system, and other companies will design apps that will live on top of that. And it is absolutely what they're trying to roll out there. So Donald Trump is basically shaking hands right there with the top Bilderberg Steering Committee member, Peter Thiel, from Clarion Capital, and he is the big brains and money behind some of these big Silicon Valley ventures, including Palantir, predictions and AI-driven predictions and data mining and data processing. So that's basically what China's doing, Mike. And so this is being pushed and rolled out in the West, again, emulating and copying all of China's reactions to the coronavirus that we showed you at the beginning of the program, Mike, is no deadlier in terms of case fatality rate than the seasonal flu, says a number of eminent doctors and epidemiologists. So we're rolling all this out for what? We've locked down for what? For something that has no bigger fatality rate than the seasonal flu.
Absolutely. Now we're over time, but we'll just finish off with a couple of items here. First of all, well, this is an article in Project Syndicate written by George Soros. The EU should issue perpetual bonds. So he's proposing, he's saying the disruption in the European Union caused by the COVID-19 pandemic should be temporary, but only if EU leaders take the extraordinary measures needed to avoid long-term damage. Fortunately, there's an easy, fast and low-cost way to finance the proposed €1 trillion European Recovery Fund. I propose that the European Union should raise the money needed for Recovery Fund by selling perpetual bonds on which the principal does not have to be repaid, although they can be repurchased or redeemed at the issuer's discretion. Authorising this issue would be the first priority for the forthcoming European Council summit. Well, basically what he's trying to sell the European Union is an interest-free mortgage. So you get the money, you never pay the capital back, but you just keep paying the interest on it forever, in perpetuity, unless you decide at some point you're going to redeem them. But he's saying this is really good because a €1 trillion perpetual bond with a 0.5% coupon would cost the EU budget a mere €5 billion per year. That's less than 3% of the EU's 2020 budget. I wasn't aware they'd set one yet, but anyway, there you go. But he says that one of the advantages of this is that an EU-issued perpetual bond would be a very attractive asset for the European Central Bank bond purchase programs. Since the maturity of the perpetual bond is always the same, the ECB would not be required to rebalance its portfolio. So he's basically suggesting that these could be paid for via quantitative easing. So the European Central Bank prints money, and just then the European Union taxpayer just keeps pumping money back in via taxes back into the ECB forever. But of course, Soros wants a bit of that action as well. Now, in terms of real economy, then back to the UK, what have we got? This is March figures from the European. From the Office for National Statistics, showing the steepest fall in retail sales since they began collecting data on this in 1996. So a 5.1% drop in March. Remember, when did the lockdown begin properly? 24th of March or so. So this is even before the lockdown has properly got engaged.
Yes.
Goodness knows what's going to happen in April, but 5.1%. So far in March.
What do you think we're looking at? 30, it'd be 30+% drop, won't it?
I would have thought so, yes.
Yeah, or something in that neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely.
And ditto, Mike, for GDP. Those figures haven't yet come to be realized yet in terms of drop in GDP. They're already throwing around statistics, Mike. Even in the UK, something like the economy is losing somewhere in the neighborhood of between 2.5 and 3 billion pounds per day. In terms of GDP. So that's just going to be a horror story in about 30 days' time.
Absolutely. So, and, everybody putting a lot of store in the government's program to keep wages rolling in, or paying 80% of people's wages in the meantime. Remember, that ends in June. Whether that gets renewed further than June, this is something that business leaders are attempting to get the government to agree to, but there's no movement on that yet. What happens in June to all those furloughed people? I would say a significant proportion of them are at major risk of finding themselves redundant at that point. So, it's not over yet. We have big economic problems ahead, big economic problems. And I think the theme of this program, Patrick, has been, where's the justification for the lockdown? I think it's time people started asking serious questions.
Not only is there no justification, Mike, for the lockdown, it's not in the science, as they say. We're being guided by the science. I'd love to meet the science. Who is this guy?
That's Neil Ferguson,
Who is the science? Okay. Not only is the lockdown not justified, but I believe, Mike, I strongly suspect that in a very brief period of time, maybe in a month or two, we're going to learn from the data and from statistics that the lockdown policy has driven up deaths, even deaths of supposedly of COVID-19, but also secondary deaths as well, and a whole host of other areas that actually drove up casualties at an alarming rate as opposed to what would have happened if there was no lockdown.
Yeah, well, we're already seeing that in the statistics. So what can you say?
The debate, Mike, is over because the non-lockdown states are the control group and the lockdown states are the experiment.
Absolutely.
We've got to come to grips with that eventually.
Yes. Well, we will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for joining us. We will be back at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.